Okay, folks, get ready, because today we're going deep on a topic that's been around forever but still kind of gets under our skin, the devil. We've got a whole bunch of sources lined up from different religions, philosophies, you name it, and we're going to try to unpack what this whole devil thing is really all about.
It really is amazing how this one figure, whether we call him Satan or Lucifer or Iblis or any number of other names, has stuck with us across so many cultures for
It's
centuries.
true. It's like this primal instinct almost, like we need to personify the stuff that scares us, maybe even the stuff that we secretly find fascinating. So before we go down the rabbit hole of all the different versions of the devil out there, let's maybe just take a step back for a second. What are we even talking about when we say the devil? Like, is there even a single definition?
Oh, that's a good question because it's actually not as simple as you might think. Even the word devil itself has a whole history behind it. It comes from the Greek word diabolos, which means slanderer, basically someone who stirs the pot, spreads rumors, and just generally messes things up.
Oh boy, already sounds like a real charmer. And I can see how that image of the devil as a troublemaker, someone whispering doubts in your ear, that pops up in a lot of different culture stories.
You got it. But what the devil actually does, what his whole deal is, really depends on who's telling the story. Take the Baha'i faith, for example. They don't see the devil as some supernatural boogeyman out to get you. Instead, they use the idea of a devil to represent the not so great parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, those selfish impulses we all have that we got to try to overcome.
Okay, so it's more about battling the little devil on your shoulder than some external bad guy. I can definitely get on board with that.
Exactly. It's about that inner struggle we all deal with. But then on the other hand, you've got Christianity with its classic image of Satan as this fallen angel, God's ultimate enemy fighting it out for the souls of humanity. And that image, oh man, it's everywhere in Western culture, art, literature.
Yeah.
You even hear it in everyday language, like when someone talks about playing devil's advocate.
You're telling me. And didn't the Christian devil kind of borrow some ideas from even older beliefs too?
That's right. Early Christians would actually demonize some of the Roman and Greek gods they saw them as being in league with the devil. It was a way to set the new faith apart from those older pagan traditions.
So they were remixing their theology even way back then.
Yeah.
But you want to talk about a different take on the devil. Gnosticism really throws a curveball into the mix,
Mhm.
right? It's less fallen angel and more like cosmic middle manager who messed up, if I'm understanding it right.
That's one way to put it. Yeah, in Gnosticism, they've got this figure called the demiurge. He's the one who created the material world. But he's kind of incompetent and honestly kind of a jerk. I'm not sure I'd call him pure evil, but he's definitely not winning any awards for best universe creator either.
Definitely not someone you want running the show. And then there were groups like the Cathars who took this whole good versus evil thing to a whole other level, didn't they?
100%. The Cathars were all about dualism, this idea that God and the devil are these two equal forces locked in an eternal battle. Like, imagine the drama. It's the ultimate cosmic standoff with the fate of everything hanging in the balance. Obviously, this idea was a big no-no for the Catholic Church, who were all about God being the ultimate power and the source of all goodness.
Yeah, you could say that it caused a bit of a stir. It's like every culture finds its own unique way of trying to understand where evil comes from and what it means.
Hmm.
And speaking of unique perspectives, how about Islam? They've got their own fascinating take on the devil with Iblis, right? There were definitely some similarities to the Christian Satan, wouldn't you say?
For sure. Like Satan, Iblis is an angel who messed up big time and got kicked out of heaven. But for Iblis, his big crime was refusing to bow down to Adam. And it all came down to pride. That whole idea of pride being a major sin is a big deal in Islam.
Wow, so even the devil has an ego in Islam. Huh, there's something to think about. But there's another difference, isn't there? Because unlike the Christian devil, who seems always ready for a big dramatic showdown, Iblis is more of a puppet master, isn't he?
You got it. Iblis is all about temptation, whispering doubts and desires into people's hearts, trying to lead them astray without them even realizing it's happening. It's a much sneakier kind of influence. You ever get that little voice in your head trying to talk you into doing something you know you probably shouldn't?
All the time. Maybe that's just Iblis messing with me. Okay, now I'm getting creeped out. But this brings up another good question. What about Judaism? They don't really have a central devil figure in the same way that Christianity and Islam do, right?
It's definitely more complicated than that. In early Jewish tradition, they saw God as being in charge of both the good stuff and the bad stuff. But as time went on, especially after they encountered Zoroastrianism with its emphasis on this big battle between good and evil, they started to develop the idea of a Satan figure as a distinct adversary.
So you're saying even the Jewish understanding of the devil was shaped by other cultures. Man, it's amazing how these ideas travel and change over time. And speaking of good versus evil, did anyone take that idea further than the Manichaeans?
I don't think so. For them, well, Spinoza believed that evil isn't really a thing in itself. It's more like the absence of good. Kind of like how darkness is just the absence of light. So to him, a being that was defined purely by evil, that would be like trying to define something based on nothing, which just doesn't compute.
So like trying to build a house out of thin air.
Exactly. You can't have one
Think,
without the other. And this whole free will thing ties into this too. Spinoza asked this really interesting question. If the devil tempted Adam well, who tempted the devil in the first place?
ooh, now that is a brain twister. It's like, who kicked off this whole mess? Did the devil have his own little tempter whispering in his ear?
Right. It gets to the core of this huge philosophical debate about free will versus determinism. Like, if even the devil is being influenced by something else, does that mean we ever really have a choice?
Makes you wonder if you could hit rewind on the whole universe. Would everything happen the exact same way?
Okay, now I'm spiraling. But anyway, moving on from that existential crisis for a second. Kant had a bit of a different take on the devil, didn't he? He wasn't so worried about whether the devil actually existed. He was more interested in what the idea of the devil represented.
Exactly. For Kant, the devil wasn't some supernatural bad guy. It was more like a symbol for this idea of pure rational evil. And that's not about just giving in to temptation or doing bad stuff because you're feeling impulsive. It's about knowing exactly what's right and wrong and choosing to do wrong anyway just because you can.
Okay, see, that's what I call truly messed up. Making a conscious decision to be bad. That's a whole other level of scary.
I know, right? This idea of being who understands morality but just chooses to reject it completely, that's chilling. But Kant also said that humans, even at our worst, we can never be purely devilish like that. We're just too complex, too driven by all these different factors, some good, some not so good. We're not wired for pure evil, basically. So even the most villainous people out there, they've still got a few redeeming qualities, or at least some messed up backstory that might explain their choices. Honestly, that's kind of a relief.
It's definitely an interesting thought, isn't it? Makes you wonder what's scarier. A being of pure evil acting with cold, calculated malice? Or the idea that evil can be much more subtle, much more woven into the everyday choices we make?
Okay, yeah, that is a chilling thought. And it's fascinating how many different ways the devil has been portrayed over time, from terrifying monsters to smooth-talking tempters. Every culture seems to project its own fears and anxieties onto this figure.
Oh, absolutely. You've got the classic horned red-skinned devil with a pitchfork, but it can also be a serpent, a dragon, a grotesque monster, or even something much more subtle.
Right, like that Baha'i idea of the devil as our own lower selves whispering temptations in our ear. It's almost like the devil has gone undercover, hiding in plain sight.
100%. It reminds us that evil doesn't always show up with flashing lights and sirens. Sometimes it disguises itself as our own desires, our own rationalizations, our own excuses for taking the easy way out. And honestly, that can be way harder to resist than some fire-breathing monster, don't you think?
Makes you think twice about hitting that snooze button, huh? Like, is sleeping in really worth risking eternal damnation? Okay, maybe that's a bit dramatic, but seriously, after going down this rabbit hole of ancient religions, philosophies, different cultures, what's the takeaway here? Is there even an answer to the question, is the devil real?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And like all the really juicy questions out
Right.
there, I don't think there's one easy answer. But if you ask me, I think what matters most is understanding how powerful this whole archetype really is. You know, it represents our deepest fears, the things we can't control, even the parts of ourselves we don't like to admit are there.
So it's less about believing in some red dude with horns and a pitchfork, and more about realizing that every culture, every belief system, even deep down inside ourselves, there's this potential for darkness.
Exactly. The devil, in all his different forms, gives us a way to look at those shadows head on, ask those tough questions about good and evil, and really wrestle with what it means to be human.
And those answers, they're not set in stone, are they? I mean, we've gone from seeing the devil as this all-powerful enemy to thinking of him as more of a symbol for our own flaws.
Yeah.
Like everyone's got their own interpretation.
And that's the point. What we see as evil in one time or place could be totally different somewhere else. It all depends on our own experiences, our cultures, even our history.
But I guess it's a good reminder to never stop asking questions. We can't just accept one version of the devil and call it a day.
Absolutely not. It's up to each of us to grapple with these ideas, challenge what we think we know, and figure out what the devil really means in our own lives.
Because maybe at the end of the day, the biggest battle isn't against some external devil figure, but against the urge to oversimplify, to point fingers, to shut down conversations.
Now there's a thought to chew on, and who knows, maybe that's exactly where the really interesting stuff begins.